This is WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report, and this is Yuri Rashkin. I'm excited to welcome to the program Anton Barbashin, who is managing editor of Interception. Anton, welcome to the program.
I am glad to be here.
I'd like to begin by at least describing what this Interception project is. It also sounds very similar to another project, Interception, which it's not. So if you want to, because Glenn Greenwald is the one who is behind, one of the people involved. And that certainly is a good confusion to make with somebody because it's a very interesting, thought-provoking brand there. But can you share with the listeners a little bit about Interception and what is that project?
Well, first of all, it has nothing to do with the other projects. It's actually, the first time I've heard Interception being compared to Greenwald's project. But anyway, Interception is basically an online platform that provides for in-depth analysis of Russian foreign and domestic politics. We give a platform to experts in economics, political science, sociology, you name it. Pretty much everything that deals with Russia. We have authors also pretty much from all over the place, from Russia, Ukraine, EU countries, the US. Yeah.
How does a project like this come together?
Basically, the idea was by myself pretty much and my colleague Olga Risova, the senior editor. It was, I think, 2014. We were back in Moscow at the time, and we were thinking that, well, there's definitely a need to bring out more new names, new ideas, new research with regards to Russia. And we are actually fortunate enough to get in touch with a group of people in Poland, namely the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding, a Polish publicly funded organization that were eager to create a joint venture that ended up being the Interception.
That's fantastic, and you really do cover a wide range of topics. And you have some recognizable names writing for you as well. I think Vladislav Inozemtsev is someone whose name is familiar to most, interested in the subject of Russia. Who do you feel is your audience?
Well, actually, we have, as you know, Interception is published both in Russian and English. So we both cover English-speaking and Russian-speaking audiences. As for the Russian-speaking audience, I think about 30, overall, about 30% of our audience comes from Russia. Then we have Ukraine, United States, UK, Poland, Germany, and then pretty much a little bit of everything.
And I think that's where we can kind of focus in on the nature of the conversation, because if we're doing this in English for English-speaking audience, we have to take that audience's priorities into consideration, because there are differences between what different audiences care and want to know about. So from American point of view, let's say, the big question is, how are Russians involved in our politics? How are Russians involved in our foreign affairs and controlling the direction of the United States? What do you feel that Interception has been able to provide to answer that question?
Look, this is probably the question for the FBI and other agencies that are actually dealing with the investigation. So far, I don't think we had anything that was purposefully dealing with that question in particular, because, well, it's part of the editorial policy. We don't actually order our authors to write something in particular. We expect them to propose us what they think would be relevant, and then we have an editorial process of deciding whether we want it or not, whether it requires additional remarks and so on and so forth. So with this question in mind, I don't think we've had anything proposed to us recently that was good enough to be published.
That's unfortunate.
Huh?
That's unfortunate.
Well, that's a very complicated topic. There's a lot of rumors here. There's a lot of unconfirmed information, and when I see the text that I believe would be decent enough and in good enough quality, we'd be happy to publish.
Is there a story, is there explanation that you would not believe? Or at this point, anything goes, and whatever it turns out to be, whether Trump has a code name or whatever, or maybe this is just all one big coincidence. Um,
Look, um, well, I'm obviously not an expert in Trump's connection with Russia, but I would not. I'm inclined to think that he's not an agent. Obviously, the people in Russia were eager to see whether he'd be cooperative on various issues. And obviously, from what we know about Kislyak and others, there were several attempts to contact his team and to uh, think of possible cooperation. But I'm not really buying the whole idea of Trump being the Russian candidate fully, because I just don't see enough evidence. And from what I see and of what I've been noticing in Moscow all throughout the election and before the election, they were preparing for Hillary Clinton.
that's true. All reasons, all signs point that Kremlin has given up on Trump, and were, I guess, pleasantly surprised. And that's another thing that I wanted to discuss with you, is a little bit of a use of language in your reporting. I think that the language that you use, I would describe as more reserved versus as strongly worded as some of the other things that you can find online. And
Yeah, very well could be. Yeah,
and
well,
I'm trying
stuff.
to figure out how do you navigate your way of providing the information that seems as bias free as possible to your audience. How can people trust you that the information that you're providing is accurate? This is such a gray world.
Well, look, we hope that the ones that are reading our materials are capable to distinguish fake news and distinguish fake analysis from reasoned one based on facts. And I mean, in the end, it's for the readers to decide what is true and what is not. It's just we have the process of our editorial process is well, it's basically directed at trying to make the best out of what we have with our authors. And with regards to being, reasonable enough, we're not a newspaper. We're not trying to be sensationalists. It's about analysis. It's about facts. It's about providing, decent understanding of the situation, sometimes of more complex issues in a matter understandable for various readers.
You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM. This is Rashkin Report. I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. Today, my guest is Anton Barbashin, managing editor of Interception, which is a new venture, relatively speaking. I mean, it's Anton. How long has it been?
We actually launched May 2015.
May 2015, but
Yeah.
thanks to Facebook sponsored ads, I keep seeing your posts in front of me, so something's working. And can you talk about some of the most popular stories? Because one of the things that I see you do is you talk about what are some of the most read texts of the week. Can you talk about
Yeah.
some of the top stories and tell me what is interesting to your English language readers?
The past week, or just generally speaking?
Both.
Well, if we actually look at like top 10 most read texts on for the English speaking audience, I guess half of that would be dealing with Vladimir Putin and his personality, his inspirations, and probably about his supporters all around the world. In Europe, we had a terrific text by Andres Umland, I think, about a year ago, and it's still, getting a lot of hits from all over about Putin verstehen in Europe. I would encourage people to read that. Recently, we had a terrific text by Marlene Laurel about Ivan Ilyin as the ideological inspiration for Putin, where she argues that he's in fact not an inspiration. But I would say out of the most read materials is basically stuff we had on Russian military would be among the most read, and we have quite a few terrific and I would say brave contributors, people writing openly about Russian military and prospects and basically the methods and the way they function. which at times is not a safe business, especially if you're based out of Russia, and quite a few of our authors are based in Russia. So, I mean, there's no really a pattern, I would say, that you could easily identify which particular article would be interested for which audience, but probably our English-speaking audiences tends to react more on the stuff that deals with Russia-West relations, Putin as a personality, the issues of Russia's military engagement and war in Ukraine, the war in Syria. Yeah, probably be about the most read content.
All right. Well, that's certainly a variety of things. But let me ask you, as with all the interest in Russian-American relations and the military, do you feel that Russia these days is a country that is generally moving towards a peaceful resolution or a conflict, resolution of situation?
Oh, that has to be a joke, right? There are two ongoing wars, one in Syria, one being waged in Ukraine. So I mean,
But I think Americans really, for good reason, want peace, right? We want peace. We want peaceful resolution. Why not be peaceful with Russia and hope for everything will be great?
Look, that's obviously an option if you believe that the kind of magical stuff works, but it's not what we see, what Vladimir Putin is about. It's not what we see his goals are. I mean, there's been 3 years since the annexation of Crimea. There's an ongoing war in the east of Ukraine, and there's a lot of Russian, let's say, influence, let's put it that way, in Europe and the United States. I mean, for one, just today, Marine Le Pen was in Moscow. She's the prime candidate for the French presidency. She's the one that was actually financially supported by one of the Russian banks. So, look, there's a lot going on basically, and I'm not calling, and I hope that no one is thinking how to get more aggressive with Russia in terms of military action, because that would be a disaster for all of us. But look, some things should not be just let go. And I do believe part of the issues we have is because at particular points of history, like for instance 2008, the Georgian War, Vladimir Putin was not shown that some things are just not okay. And the same happened in the annexation of Crimea. Actually, if you look at the sanctions that were imposed on Russia after Crimea, they were very minor. I mean, most of the most serious stuff came after Donbass, but that's just the nature of the regime.
Well, and even sanctions in general have been, a lot of them have been self-inflicted.
Well, I mean, all of them are self-inflicted. I mean, nobody has
right, that's
Russia
true. Okay, but I mean, the ones that Russian government
in east of Ukraine. But yes, in fact, there are anti-sanctions or embargo on some of the European goods, and actually, those are the ones that are hurting Russian economy quite significantly as well.
All right, then does it make sense to you that a country like Russia that is so crazy is able to exist?
Look, I wouldn't say it's crazy, and it's just the logic of Vladimir Putin and the logic of Kremlin it's very different from what, let's say, the Western idea of the state is just political survival of this particular person and the system he has built, and the methods it's used are, well, generally speaking, are something that has not been acceptable in the West for quite a few decades. Let's put it that way, and it could survive.
But are they now unacceptable, or have they become unimaginable?
Well, define unimaginable. I think in the last few years we have seen lots of things that were considered unimaginable happening, and we still do. So, look, this is just the reality of things, and we need to accept them for what they are. But the one point I want to make is this regime can pretty much survive for a long time. With the propaganda that is in place in Russia, with the basically acceptance to some extent of the Russian population of the economic losses that Russia has endured over the last 3 years, and the absence of the Western resolve to show, the boundaries, this regime could very well last past 2024, and 2024 is when the President Putin's next presidential term will end. And
So,
there's every reason actually to believe that is not going to be the end of it, because look, this is the personified autocracy, and as history actually shows us, I mean, those leaders don't actually, want to go after their elections, or just don't want to go peacefully. So either he's going to die while being the president of Russia, or he's going to be ousted, which is very unlikely. So I just want to say that we have to prepare ourselves for quite a long time with Vladimir Putin as president of Russia.
really?
Yeah.
So does it mean that all Mr. Putin understands is strength? And
Well,
then
he
the
does
question is,
understand the lack of it.
right, and then the question is, how much strength does need to be demonstrated in order for it to be effective? Because it's not nuclear war necessarily. It's just there's a certain fine line, it seems, with Mr. Putin where he feels that maybe people are serious, and then he backs down.
Look, there was a case with Turkey. I don't remember if you remember when the Russian plane was down. There's the Russian planes flying over Syria, and one of them was down by the Turkish side, and that was actually the stop of all of that. I'm not saying that actually this is the resolution. That was a very dangerous situation in the Russia-Turkish relations. But basically, if it's just talks and warnings and the red lines that are never materialized in anything, and Ukraine does not get the proper support that it needs, then he'll just move forward. Look, the sanctions that were imposed on Russia are relatively minor. They are efficient, they are effective, but like compare them to sanctions that were imposed on Iran. I mean, that's just two very different things.
You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. Joining me today is Anton Barbashin, managing editor of Interception. Anton, I'd like to end our conversation with a discussion on the one topic that perhaps is a crossover, in the sense that it is big news in Russia, and also it is something that I think is should be noticed here as well. And that's that former Russian parliamentarian and Putin critic was shot dead in Kiev. And I think that is a story that is still very much reverberating in Russia, trying to understand the implication of this kind of a bold move. But I think this is something that in the West also needs to be put in the pile of those things that we considered perhaps unimaginable.
Look, obviously it's too early to assess. It's too early to say what actually happened. But it looks like a parliamentary from Russia who is a full supporter of the regime and turned to be against the regime and left Russia and started to criticize Putin was publicly killed in the center of Kiev. I'm not saying that is actually what happened, because I don't know, but it kind of looks like there was a signal sent to pretty much all of them functionaries and all of them basically parliamentaries in Russia that contemplate of leaving Russia and going to Ukraine or any other place and starting criticizing Putin's regime. It's basically kind of sending a signal that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. We do not tolerate traitors could be actually the motto of this week. And I think the signal is quite strong and evident, and it's actually horrible for Ukraine in the sense that, if you want to, let's say, flee Russia for any particular political purpose and go to Ukraine, you do know for sure it's not safe. So, yeah. But it's, as I've said, it's too early to be sure what exactly happened there.
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. Anton Barbashin, managing editor of Interception, thank you so much for joining us on Rashkin Report. And of course, if people want to learn more about Interception, how can they find you?
Well, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, or you just go directly to intersectionproject.eu.
Project.eu. All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being on the program.
My pleasure.
You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report.